Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. This webinar is for EPA Pro beta training, and today we're going to look at the IEPA processes and systems. So thank you for joining. It's quite a small group today. We do have a lot of information to get through. So over the course of the next few hours, so we're scheduled to run from 9:30 until 12:30. If you do have any questions, you have a couple of options available to you. If you would like to ask a question, please type it into the chat function and I'll keep an eye on questions as we go through the session. And if you do want to raise your hand and ask a question, you should have a little hand icon on your GoToWebinar toolbar. Just click on the hand, raise that, and I will unmute you to ask your question. Okay, so if you do have any sound issues as we go through the presentation this morning, please do drop me a message and I'll keep an eye on those. Okay then, so my name is Rebecca Wozniak. I'm an Associate Manager here at City and Guilds focusing on endpoint assessment. And I've been working on endpoint assessment for a little while now across a number of different standards. So what I'm going to do today is talk through some changes that we're going to be experiencing with endpoint assessment. Adam's got a little problem with his sound. It keeps breaking up. Okay. Adam, I'm just going to unmute you to see if our audio connection is working. Hello, can you hear me?
Hiya, yeah.
Is it intermittent? Can you hear me now?
It's a bit better now. Yeah, I can hear you better now. I think me and Matt were both having issues where you kept breaking up, but it seems to be a bit clearer now. We'll keep an eye on it, see if it comes back.
Okay, yeah, just drop me a message if it does break up. Okay, thanks, Adam. Okay, any other issues as we go through, please feel free to raise your hand, ask questions, let me know about sound issues. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've got lots to cover. There are two sessions happening today. We've got one this morning where we're focusing on processes and one later this afternoon where we're focusing on systems. So I'm going to take you through an overview. It's quite an informal session, very much because our training is evolving at the moment, and we'd welcome any feedback or questions that you have, and we're constantly updating these materials. After the session, these materials will be available to you so you can use them as a reference point, and we will be putting together a support pack for our IEPAs on using the new system and the new processes. So if we just move on, just to give you an idea of our vision. So our vision is on the screen in front of you. So I'm going to run through the EPA service, explain a little bit about where we are at the moment, where we've come from and where we're moving towards. So when we started offering endpoint assessment, we started with a very small number of standards, a very small number of EPAs. So things are on a very small scale. But over the last few years, it has upscaled significantly from around 100 events a month to nearly 2,000 events per month across approximately 52 standards. So what we need to do is review how we are delivering our endpoint assessment service and reimagine that service to put our customers at the heart of everything that we do. What we want to do and what we aim to do is give the customers the best possible service and experience that we can. And therefore, there will be a new piece of technology at the heart of what we do called EPA Pro, and that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be reworking our business processes with EPA Pro at the heart of those processes. EPA Pro is an existing piece of technology. It's already out there in the market. It's been well received, and we're going to be working with that system. What we're aiming to do is offer an end-to-end digital service from registration all the way through to the release of results, and we can use the EPA Pro system to do that. So the fundamental aim is to streamline our customer's experience and also to make the employee experience better, to improve the employee experience and reduce the amount of manual processes so that we have a streamlined approach. Also, as part of this change, we want to enhance the IEPA experience. So as an IEPA, within these changes, you will have more ownership of the process. As we move through, we will explain that in the presentation today. So our current service continues to grow. So our business as usual, our BAU business continues to grow. And EPA Pro will be introduced alongside our current offer. It will be a dual system and we'll be running both systems for a while across a period of time while we embed EPA Pro and roll it out across all of the standards that we offer. So let's move on from our vision and look at the new approach to technology and our EPA service. So as I mentioned, we're re-engineering our business processes to put the customer experience at the heart of everything that we do. And the key reasons that we need to change and we need this evolution within our EPA offer are there on the screen for you to see. So speed to market. This change will allow us to offer an end-to-end digital service to the market quicker. The customer's experience. So EPA Pro, the system, is a simple, easy-to-use application which offers all stages of the EPA journey in a single environment. As I mentioned, it's already been well received in the market and customers are interacting with it well. The employee experience. So with this adoption of the EPA Pro system, it will significantly improve the employee experience with the majority when engaging with customers. Operating at scale. So we've already mentioned that that scale of growth that has happened within our EPA service. So a key component is enabling the business to operate at scale, to look into the future and to move forward and to anticipate the changes that we need to implement to ensure that we can deal with that scale of growth. And the assessor experience, the IEPA experience. So we have some IEPAs on the webinar this morning, and you will be thinking about your current experience with the systems that we're working with. And we'll have some time for you to ask questions about these changes as we go through. Okay, so any questions at the moment? We are going to be going through this at pace and there is a lot of information. No? Okay. Okay, so the rollout of the new service and technology, so the introduction of the new EPA service and this technology will be rolled out over a phased introduction. So we started to look at the EPA Pro system and our processes and how we need to amend those so that they align and work together. We have carried out some testing already of the system. So back in December, we carried out a dry run. And within that dry run, we were able to work through the system, look at how things were going to work and prepare for our live phase, which is called the beta phase. That's being rolled out from January. So this session today is a training session in anticipation of that rollout, which is going to launch and go live from the 27th of January. The beta phase will go live with bookings for 3 customers across 4 standards. So we will be offering live endpoint assessments using EPA Pro for business admin, customer service, the lead and the adult care worker standards for 3 specially selected customers. and they will be carrying out their EPAs via the new platform and following the new processes. And this beta phase is really important to us because we need to start on a small scale with a small number of customers and EPAs so that we can understand how things are going to work within the system and the processes that we've adapted to work with that system. So we have selected you as IEPAs to participate in the beta trial phase. Now, although we're going live on the 27th of January for bookings for beta, there won't be an instant mass allocation of EPAs to you. It will be more of a slow trickle of bookings initially throughout February and throughout March. We've selected you to come on the training, and now what we need to do is explain what is going to happen moving forward. So once we've completed the beta phase, there will be a rollout to a selected group of customers and a selected group of standards as we move through 2020. And we'll keep you updated on all of those. So our objective for this training, and it is quite a full day with the processes this morning and the full afternoon of systems overview as well, but we want to give you an idea of why these changes are happening, how it's going to affect you, and what happens next. So as it says on the screen, our objectives, what we're aiming to achieve, an overview of the IEPA process, how you're going to accept, manage and complete the assessment for an EPA event as part of this new approach to our EPA service. We'll give you a demonstration and an explanation of how to use the IT systems required to support the process, and then an explanation of the feedback that the IEPA will be asked to complete and support that will be available throughout this process. And of course, an opportunity to ask questions and give initial feedback. And that's really important to us because this beta live trial phase is an opportunity for us to interact, request your feedback and to implement any changes that we need to. So it is a big period of growth and a big period of learning for all of us. So as mentioned, this is the agenda for the day. The morning session, we're aiming to work towards around 12:30. That very much depends on the number of questions that we have. And we will take a short break as well as we go through the session. Later today, the afternoon session starting at 1:30, scheduled to run through until 4:30. Again, very much depending on questions and interaction from yourselves. But the EPA Pro system will be demonstrated by our super user, Libby Timms. And she's going to actually walk you through the system to see how that is going to work. We will take another break during that session. We'll then look at next steps and then the quality assurance that sits overarching all of the IEPA endpoint assessment decisions. Okay, so what is beta then? As we've mentioned, it's a small scale go live of the new EPA service and the EPA Pro system, only with selected customers, selected IEPAs and selected apprentices. So we have put this trial together and invited you along so that we can ask you to support these endpoint assessments that are going to happen within this beta phase. The go live will provide us with a really good first opportunity to understand how the system and the processes are interacting together, but also how they can evolve and further support the future delivery of the service. As we've mentioned, the information about the standards that are being offered and when we plan to go live. So customers will need to book for this. We will be working very closely with them. Those customers are having training as well on how to use the system. And as I mentioned, our go live is planned for the 27th of January. So as an IEPA, what will you be asked to do? So you're going to attend the training, as you are today, the process and the systems overviews. Then we're going to ask you to review the training and support materials, ask you for your feedback, and then you'll be moving on and accepting EPA allocations that are offered to you via this new process and system. Then you'll be moving forward to carry out these assessments as per the training on our new live system and provide feedback on the processes and the functionality of that system. How was it to work with? What went well? What didn't go quite so well? And what can we improve when we move forward to roll out to other standards and the IEPA team as a whole? Okay, so before I go through the key stakeholders, is there any questions? No, no questions. IEPA's all okay?
I'm very pleased with the that you do.
Okay, all right then. So let's move on to key stakeholders. Let's look at who's going to be involved, who actually delivers endpoint assessment, and how all of these teams come together to make endpoint assessment possible. So at the top, we have our IEPAs, our independent endpoint assessors, and their role, it will be to schedule assessment dates, carry out assessment of apprentices' evidence, and provide failed feedback on the apprentice's performance. So the vast majority of that sits within business as usual, the processes that our IEPAs are already very familiar with. EPA booking team, so technical support for the IEPAs and customers for those EPA events and the associated activity. So as we know, the EPA booking team are super busy covering all of the standards, all of the bookings, and have upscaled significantly from around 150 to 200 EPA bookings a month to an expected 1,200 for January 2020, and that is a massive increase. So they are super busy working behind the scenes to support all of the LEPAs and IEPAs and our EPA customers. And they will continue to do that. Just got a question that's popped up. Oh, the sound is breaking up. Do we have anybody else with sound issues? Can you just raise your hand if it's a bit patchy? It is a bit patchy for Steve and Adam. Oh, it's better now, Jane said. Matt Bell. Oh no, it's all the burnt wood people. I'm so sorry. Let me just see. Oh, better now also. Thanks, Matt. I think it's dropping in and out a little bit, isn't it? Please do let me know. It's looking good on my connection this end, but it's technology. Okay, thank you very much for letting me know. And we'll persevere. We are recording, so I'll be able to share the recording with you. Okay, thank you. Oh, Jane's just left a message. Can we repeat the last bit? Yeah, absolutely, no problem. So back to key stakeholders. Apologies if you did hear me, but we're just going to recap. So IEPA assessors, independent endpoint assessors, will be they're scheduling the assessments, carrying out the assessments, recording those assessment decisions in line with the requirements of the standard, completing your IEPA recording forms, and providing fail feedback on apprentice performance. The EPA booking team, as I mentioned, working very hard to support EPA customers, our IEPAs, our LEPAs. They'll be providing the technical support for IEPAs and customers with the EPA events and the associated activities that are going to sit with those. Allocation of EPA events to IEPAs and the support in booking of the GoToMeeting events. So very similar to what they do at the moment. So that's going to continue. LEPAs, obviously their role is to quality assure the work of the IEPA and provide technical support and guidance as the first point of contact for the IEPA for any technical queries. Once the LEPA's quality assured, they would then release the results, sign that off, and it would be released via our internal processes back out to the EPA customer. Associate management team, so we are responsible for recruitment, training, standardisation of IEPAs and LEPAs, ongoing performance management and support of our teams of LEPAs and IEPAs. Very much still supporting the quality processes, so working closely with the LEPAs to ensure that all of their IEPA teams are standardised and kept up to date with regular updates on changes to processes. And the last team that you can see listed there is the EPA Gateway team. So that is where all of the EPA bookings come into, all of the gateway applications, and those are checked by the EPA Gateway team to check that all of the criteria has been met, so that then the apprentice can move forward to EPA. Okay, any questions, any issues with sound? No, okay, lovely, good. So let's move on. So we've just covered the main responsibilities. So what are going to be the key differences for our IEPAs in the future? What's different and what are we going to be asking you to do? So currently we have our endpoint assessor over here, and they will be available for EPA allocations. The EPA booking team will allocate and look after the rescheduling, scheduling of those EPA events. And then we have our customers, and we're carrying out the event for the EPA customers. That's how it's currently working. And then in the future, we will make some slight changes. So in the future, we're going to have EPA Pro, and we'll still have all of the same stakeholders, but they will operate in a slightly different way. So as you can see, we've got the EPA booking team as we move across from left to right, and we've got the case allocation. So the allocation will happen at an earlier stage than it currently does. You can see there that the EPA booking team will look after the allocations that go to the independent endpoint assessor. The IEPA will have a caseload of allocations of EPAs, and it will be the IEPA that supports the scheduling. So the IEPA will play a key role. It's just to summarise the difference, the IEPA will play a key role and have more control, and effectively removing the EPA team as the team that currently arrange the EPA events. The IEPA will pick up their caseload of allocations of EPAs, and they will be contacting the customer to arrange those EPA events. They will be scheduling that together with the customer. We're going to explain in a lot more detail in this presentation how that is going to work, but the IEPA will liaise with the customer and plan those events and schedule them in. The EPA booking team will still be there to support, as we can see on this diagram, but it will be the IEPA that takes that key role. We've got some notes there on the screen just as a reminder. So when the case is allocated to the IEPA can accept it or they can reject it. So that happens now. There's no major change to that, but IEPAs will work directly with the customer, and we will aim to make sure that the scheduling of the EPAs is a lot more efficient because as the IEPA, you won't need to go through the EPA team to ask them to make changes, for them to contact the customer, for them to come back to you. We're going to streamline the whole process, and hopefully that will make your life as an IEPA a lot easier and a lot more straightforward, and also for the customers. So that's quite a big change. Do the IEPAs on the line have any comments at the moment, or any questions that they want to ask? No? Okay. So if we just have a bit of a detailed look then at how the process is going to work, we'll drill down a little bit further into this assessment process overview. So as we've just mentioned, we've got the caseload, and that is allocated to the assessor. The IEPA, the assessor, will accept the EPA case. This is best case scenario, so we're accepting here. And then we move on, and you will then meet as an IEPA remotely with the provider. So the EPA customer, the training provider, whoever has booked the EPA will be the main point of contact. And you will meet with the provider as an IEPA remotely to determine the dates of the assessment methods. And this will be referred to as a planning meeting. The assessments will then take place. So you've met, you've planned everything. We're going to give you all of the recording forms and templates that you're going to need to fill in as part of that planning meeting. Jane, did you want to say anything? Your webcam just popped on.
We're struggling with a bit of technology, Rebecca. Just bear with us a second, because
Okay.
we don't seem to have lost control of the webinar, and we're not quite. We might have to come out and go back in again.
Ah, okay.
Can we go back in again?
Oh dear. It's going well. Just bear with us whilst Jane and Rachel rejoin. Okay, start to have a think about questions whilst we're just having a short interlude. But obviously that's quite a big change there with the planning meeting. Now, for some standards already, we do carry out an initial meeting with the customer for our hospitality standards. So it's not completely new to us in the world of EPA. And it's something that we can draw on our experience with hospitality standards. And that's what we're doing. We're amending that approach to actually roll that out across all of the standards. So as an IEPA, you will have, oh, I think they're back. Maybe not. Okay, let's just carry on. So as an IEPA, you will have a planning meeting document that you will fill in to capture all of the information that's agreed at the planning meeting. So depending on your standard, and we're going to look at a couple of examples for business admin and customer service later, depending on your standard will depend on the assessment methods that you need to carry out for that EPA. So if you need to carry out an observation or a professional discussion for the EPA, then you will discuss all of that at the planning meeting. And you will arrange directly with the provider when that observation is going to take place, when the PD is going to take place, the locations for those, whether it's face-to-face or remote. All of that information will be captured at the planning stage. Hi, Jane. Hi, Rachel. Are you back?
We're back. Sorry, Rebecca. I think we've seemed to have resolved our technical problems. We'll put ourselves back on mute.
Okay.
If there's anything to add, we'll come in. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so that's the planning meeting. So once you've had that planning meeting with the provider and you've captured all of the information to schedule the next assessment methods, You will be entering that into EPA Pro, into the system. So don't worry about that now, because we're going to talk about it more this morning, and we're going to show you how to do that in the session this afternoon. Then the assessments will take place, hopefully as you've planned them, and the evidence will be available for you to assess prior to carrying out those events, if that's what is required for your standard. And of course, you're going to make your IEPA assessment decisions and your judgments and your justifications as you would do now, against the requirements of the standard, on your IEPA recording forms. So the forms that you've got, you'll be working with those, and that will remain the same at the moment. Results, where appropriate, feedback. So once everything is captured and entered into the system, the results will be finalised. So your LEPA will quality assure, as it says there in the box. The result will be released for the assessment. And if there is a fail for that endpoint assessment, then you will produce the feedback as you do now, and that will be made available as well to the customer. Once all the assessments have been completed, the IEPA works out the overall result and enters it into the platform. So a key difference with EPA Pro, and we can demonstrate this to you on the screen within the systems training, is that the difference is with the current LA EPA portal system, the IEPA completes everything on the system, it's quality assured by the LEPA, and then the result is released, the overall result for everything that's happened for the EPA. But with EPA Pro, as we carry out an assessment method, we will be releasing by component for the standards that that's applicable for. So again, when we look at the system, that will become clearer. Any questions on the process overview? Lots of changes, I understand, for IEPAs. Julie, you have a question. Let me just unmute you. Hello, Julie.
Hello, thank you. I'm just asking about the planning meeting, a couple of questions. How soon would that occur before the actual endpoint assessment? And would it be via GoToMeeting? Would it be phone? Would it be email? Or does it just depend on the provider and the situation?
Okay, really good questions. So we're going to go through some timelines and SLAs in a little while, but when you are allocated the EPA, when it's on your system, you would then be able to set up the planning meeting. We're going to go through email templates and the timings around that as we go through the presentation. And the key is, because you're going to be in control of the planning as the IEPA, you need to make sure in that planning meeting that the dates that you agree for the EPA events provide you with enough time to assess the evidence. So if it's a showcase, you've got enough time to fully assess, as you would do now. So if you accept an allocation, you know how much time you've got to assess that before the EPA event, don't you?
Yeah, so it would be the same sort of timeline.
It would be the same timeline, so we'd be looking for you to have that evidence available 2 weeks before, and then plan in the dates for the subsequent assessments.
Okay, thank you.
Is that okay? And what was your other question about the planning meeting?
If it would be phone, email, GoToMeeting, or it just depends on the provider and the situation.
Well, where possible, GoToMeeting.
Right.
But I'm aware that that's not always possible for all customers.
Okay.
So where possible, GoToMeeting, and at the moment, that's the plan. Is that okay?
Yeah, lovely, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Really good questions. Any other questions from anybody else that has listened to that change in the process? No? Okay. Everybody is very quiet today. Okay, so let's move on. So the key changes, this is a bit of a breakdown for you that you'll be able to refer back to look at the key differences between our current process and what's going to happen for beta. So we have current on the left-hand side. So the EPA booking team currently set those assessment dates based on the availability of the IEPA, and also in liaison with the customer and what the best dates are for the customer. But in the new world, the IEPA will own that process, and they will set the assessment dates that will take place for the subsequent assessment events via that planning meeting directly with the provider. At the moment, all of our documents, our assessment documents, are stored on LA, on the EPA portal. So we're all used to using the EPA portal, and there's going to be quite a big change for beta. This is one of those areas that's a big change in this process. So assessment documents will be stored in a SharePoint location. All of the assessor documents will be stored there. And for EPA Pro, there's going to be a standard approach. So whilst we're moving through EPA Pro beta phase as a live trial, we will be using SharePoint to store all of your assessor documents. Don't worry too much about that now, because we will be giving you some additional training and guidance on locating your documents, where we're going to save them, and a process flow of how that's going to happen. So on SharePoint, we're going to save all of your assessor documents. So if you think about all of those IEPA recording forms, they are the inner workings of how we calculate and document our IEPA decisions. And we don't share currently those documents with customers. And in the new world, we still won't share them with customers. Those are our assessor documents, and we're going to keep them, rather than on Learning Assistant, in a SharePoint folder. We will use EPA Pro, and we will upload some information to EPA Pro, and that will be just the outcome. There will be on EPA Pro the assessment evidence and information that the IEPA needs to review. So that's a big change, and it's a temporary workaround for our beta phase. So please watch this space for more information. EPA results are released once all relevant assessments are completed on LA with our current process. But as I've already mentioned, with EPA Pro, the results will be released. Oh, we have a new attendee. Oh, I think it's Jane again.
Rebecca, I'm
Okay.
sorry, we're having a lot of problems with our login. So if we do back out, we'll come back in again.
Okay then. Thanks, Rachel. Okay, so where were we? Assessments. So EPA results will be released per component in the new world for the beta. And again, our demonstration later today on the system will take you through that step by step really clearly. Libby will answer any questions and explain how that's going to work. Fail feedback is released to customers once all the EPA assessments have been completed currently. But with the new approach, the fail feedback will be released to customers after every assessment. So releasing by component, by assessment method, means that if they fail, then they will have specific feedback for that assessment method that's been failed. And all of this will come together to make sense within that demonstration. EPA booking team, rescheduling the existing bookings. So if there's any issues with an EPA at the moment and it can't go ahead for any reason, the EPA team will reschedule that. They'll liaise with the customer and with the IEPA. If it's a resit, they also look after that. So there's a lot of admin and resource and time that goes into that process. So with the new world, with the new EPA Pro approach, the IEPA owns the process. So they will be able to reschedule assessments and also set and agree resit dates. So that is also a big change. And again, we're going to be giving you guidance on how that's going to work and what you would need to do in the system if an EPA needs to be rescheduled or changed or amended. And then the last thing on this slide is the go-to meeting. So it's currently organised by the EPA booking team. So as an IEPA, you would receive a go-to meeting that's been organised for you with the link. You've got your own go-to meeting account access. You can go in there and access the link. So for beta, there will be no change to that. So that's one less thing that you need to worry about changing at the moment. You will not need to worry about that for beta. The EPA booking team will continue to arrange those go-to meetings, to provide you with that link, and you can access it in your go-to meeting account. When we move forward into second phase of beta, roll out to other standards and other IEPAs across the whole offer, then we will move to a point where go-to meeting is organised by the IEPA, but we're not quite there yet. Okay, lots of key changes. Any questions, please feel free to ask me. I'll be honest, I might not know all of the answers at the moment. It's still very much a work in progress, but please do ask. And if we don't know, then we can get back to you on the answer. Okay, let's move forward then and continue at pace through all of the content. So EPA Pro. Let's just give you a little bit of a background on EPA Pro, and just to say that initially, not all of the functionality within EPA Pro will be used. Oh, we have a question. Okay, that's a good point, Steve. We're still working through the process on how GoToMeeting is going to work. So IEPAs carrying out, if we just go back so I can just make sure it's really clear when I'm explaining, for GoToMeeting. So there's no change for beta. The EPA booking team will still set up that GoToMeeting link. But as an IEPA, when you've completed the planning meeting, you will need to request that the go-to meetings are being set up. And we're currently working on a pro forma for you to complete for that, but that's very, very new. Yes, the go-to meeting request form will need to be sent to the EPA booking team. We are still working through that and how exactly that's going to work and how it's going to look. So as soon as we know, we can share that with everybody in an update. The EPA booking team will still set up the go-to meeting, but the IEPA will need to request it because, of course, the IEPA will have all of the information because they've had a planning meeting about when those assessments are going to take place. So leave that with us because we are putting together the process of how that request is going to work. Okay, I'm just going to pause there. Any questions, any other questions at the moment? Is everybody's sound still okay? Yep. Okay, good. Let's continue. Sound is fine, brilliant, thank you. Thank you, Adam. So let's continue then. Still lots to cover. So as I mentioned, we're going to be using EPA Pro, but not all of the functionality because we're going to use it in a slightly different way. Obviously, EPA Pro is a ready-built system and we already have our existing processes, and what we need to do is align the two so that they can work together. So part of the beta will be to explore how we can do this, how we can make it work, and how we also need to evolve our processes. And a really good example was just that with GoToMeeting. So we know how it works at the moment, we know how we want to make it work, and to make it work we need to put a document in place to request those GoToMeetings to be set up. So as we move through, there will be last minute changes. There will be things that we need to tweak, and that's what beta is all about. So the key IT systems that we're going to use, as mentioned, is the EPA Pro system. And with EPA Pro, the customer will register and book through the process that is the customer onboarding process. They will make that registration, they'll make their booking, and that will come into the system. And remember, for beta, we're only working with 3 customers. So at the moment, there's a lot of support and a lot of training being put in place for those customers to understand how we're changing and how to interact with the system and make their registrations and bookings. Allocations of the EPA cases, so the EPAs will be allocated to our IEPAs via the system, and we'll take you through later how to look at your caseload, how to accept and how to move things through the system. We can book our assessment dates on there, so it'll be really clear to the IEPA and to the customer what's been agreed, and the customer can look at the system and see when the observation date has been planned for, when is the professional discussion happening. So it's a two-way system that allows the IEPA to add in that information and for the customer to be able to see the progression and what the commitment is for the EPA. The customer will submit their learner evidence. So I appreciate I'm talking across some standards here, but a portfolio is a good example of evidence that would be submitted. And then obviously the assessment judgments and the provision of the feedback by the IEPA will be made available via EPA Pro. So at every stage, the IEPA can see very clearly where they are with that apprentice, and also the customer can see very clearly what the progression is of that apprentice and at what point in the EPA process that apprentice is currently sitting at. So a quality assurance of the IEPA judgments by the LEPA will still take place. They will still look at the information and the grading outcomes that you as the IEPA have come to and your justifications. They will still provide you with feedback on your performance. There will still be a RAG risk-rated approach. None of that part of the performance management and the support piece is going to change. What will change is how the LEPA quality assures within the portal, just because it's using a different system. But the whole of the quality assurance piece will still be there to guide and support you as an IEPA. And then we'll issue the results to the customer via the EPA Pro system. So as you can see there, we've still got a note about the wall garden and GoToMeeting. Just want to look at that for a moment. So customers will have access to our wall garden system. As an IEPA, I get asked this question a lot. As an IEPA, you do not need access to the wall garden. The wall garden is an IT system that we use here at City and Guilds. It has lots of different functions, but for endpoint assessment, we use that as an IT system for customers to book evolve tests. So they will be able to book, and it's a system that they, if they're already a customer, which the beta customers are, they'll be familiar with that. If we move down then to SharePoint, so you may already have used SharePoint in the past. You may have used a type of SharePoint. It's a central storage area that we can provide you with access to. It's secure, and we are going to store all of assessment documentation. That assessment documentation that's not being shared with the customer. So these are GoToMeeting recordings, your assessor observation forms, any other working documents where you as the IEPA are assessing the evidence and making your judgments, that will be stored in SharePoint. That information, those working documents, will be shared with key stakeholders. So your LEPA will need access to those to quality assure them, because the quality assurance will sit away from EPA Pro in terms of reviewing the documents in SharePoint, and then the LEPA will enter and sign off on EPA Pro. And also we need to make sure we've got those documents available for EQA bodies. So we're audited rigorously, regularly, and we need to make sure that we've got that information stored and available. And the SharePoint option is currently going to be used for beta. So any changes to that, we will update you. Okay, so before we go on, is there any questions? Because we're moving through very quickly this morning. It's a much smaller group today and there's not as many questions, or perhaps I'm just talking too quickly. Let's have a look and see if you've got any questions. No? Oh, yeah, there's a question. Oh, good, thank you. I'm very pleased. You can ask me anything that you like. I may not know the answer, but please do ask, and I'll try my best. So these are the systems, these are the key changes. We've covered the reasons why we need to make this change. We need to provide the best possible quality service that we can for our customers. We need to make it more user-friendly for our EPAs and for our internal teams as well. And we need to make sure that we can scale up based on the forecasted figures that are coming towards us in 2020. We need to make sure that we've got the capacity and the systems to support it. Okay, so no other questions. Let's move on to our first slide. Now, I'm conscious that we do have a mixture of standards for this presentation. So I've got a couple of slides, one looking at business admin, one looking at customer service, just to look at the assessment methods that sit within them and how these changes are going to affect what we do. So let's just look at business admin, then we'll look at customer service, and then I'll see if you've got any questions. So with any endpoint assessment, with any apprenticeship standard, there will be a series of assessment methods that sit within that standard that need to be completed. And depending on the standard and the requirements of the assessment plan, will depend on when the assessment methods happen. Do they need to happen in a certain order? Does something need to happen first? Or can it wait to the end? And what actually are the requirements of the assessment plan? Because that is what we're going to be audited on. That is what we must deliver. So for business admin, you can see here on my slide that we have the assessment methods, starting with an evolved test. And that evolved test for business admin, within the assessment plan, it advises that it's sat first. So where possible, we would like that test to be sat first, but it doesn't mandate that it must be sat in that order. So we have the evolved test that is completed. And when the apprentice completes that, there is an outcome from that test, and that is made available to the IEPA. And that test result is then taken into account when the IEPA formulates the overall grade for the endpoint assessment. For some standards, the content of that overall test result will need to be considered by the IEPA before they move on to subsequent assessment methods. But for business admin, the evolved test is taken first. It's advised that it's taken first. Then the next assessment method is the interview based on the portfolio. So whilst the customer will be required to submit a portfolio of evidence, that portfolio will be reviewed by the IEPA. It's not technically assessed, and it doesn't sit as an assessment method per se, but it will be reviewed. And the IEPA will review that portfolio evidence, and it will be uploaded 10 working days in advance of the interview taking place. The interview will be based on that portfolio, so the IEPA will have reviewed the portfolio and prepared for the interview, and the interview will be conducted remotely, obviously with the apprentice in attendance there. So the IEPA will carry out the interview based on that review of the portfolio. And then the next assessment method is stated as presentation, but that is also followed by some QA. So again, that presentation evidence needs to be uploaded 10 working days in advance of the EPA events. Business admin is conducted completely remotely, so it's a remote standard, and the IEPA will therefore need to make sure that they have got all of the information that they need to review and to plan ready for these assessment methods. And usually for business admin, assessment methods 2 and 3 will take place on the same day, usually one after the other. But again, that will all come back to the planning meeting with the IEPA and with the provider. Okay, any questions on what I've said there from any of the IEPAs? Is that all okay? Yeah, okay, no questions that I can see. So that's business admin. And just to give you another example, we've got customer service. And these are good comparison standards because one is entirely remote with the business admin, and the customer service requires a visit for a practical observation. So for customer service then, they will need to submit a showcase portfolio. So at your planning meeting, you're going to be discussing not only the dates of when the assessment methods are going to take place, but having access to that showcase portfolio in good time to prepare. So here we say they need to submit that apprentice showcase portfolio 2 weeks prior to the interview date. So they will need to make sure that they have that uploaded so that the IEPA can review it. And there is a new element to customer service with an interview of with the apprentice of around the showcase portfolio. So that will all need to be planned in as part of the planning meeting. Then subsequent assessment methods will need to plan in the practical observation. That is a visit, it's on site, so we need to know the location, the timings, the main contact point for when you arrive there as an IEPA, all of that information that you know from your experience of carrying out EPAs that you're going to need for carrying out that practical observation. And a real key point for customer service standards as well is that you're agreeing that observation time at a time that's suitable for the employer, suitable for the apprentice, but at a time when you are actually going to get to observe some work being carried out. So that is a key point of arranging a visit. Am I actually going to see them working? Am I actually going to be able to get evidence and observe them carrying out the role? And then professional discussion, which is the last assessment method for customer service. It might be on site. It very much depends on the time of the observation. You might be seeing more than one apprentice on that day. If that's the case, and that is a number of apprentices for the same customer, then as part of the planning meeting, you could discuss with the provider and arrange all of those dates and locations at the same time. For the PD, then it might be on site if you've got time and that's been factored in. If you're doing a number of EPAs travelling between locations, it might not be possible to do the PD on site straight after the practical observation. So it can be carried out remotely if required. And the PD for customer service is very much the last assessment component. So that pulls everything together. That is the last assessment method that takes place. as you would normally do. And you go away, you complete your IEPA recording forms, you'll save them into SharePoint as we're going to demonstrate, and then you're going to update the EPA Pro system. So the fundamentals of what you do underpinning your decisions will remain the same. You're still going to be working with the same standards, but with slightly different processes. Any questions? No? No hands? Okay, this is good. I haven't completely confused the IEPAs that we have on the line. Okay, so allocation of EPA cases. As I've mentioned, the EPA booking team will be allocating the EPA caseloads to the IEPAs based on an understanding of availability, and that's a really key point. So at the moment, you are using the availability portal to capture your availability. Please continue to do that for beta, because we will still be using that availability data to allocate caseloads. You can add in as much availability as you know, and we would recommend you to do that for the next 4 to 6 months if possible. You can always change it, but please keep it up to date. So the EPA team allocate based on that availability. Obviously, we'll still be considering conflict of interest and all of the usual things that we do, geographical location, etc. Best case scenario, you would accept that allocation as an IEPA, but you may be able to reject and reallocate, reject the EPA, and a reallocate would happen. Just got a question there, which I will respond to. There we go. Okay, thank you for that question. So you may accept the allocation, you may reject the allocation. And Libby's going to show you later on the system, if you reject the allocation, you will need to give us a reason for that. If you're showing us available in the portal and you've rejected an allocation, we will need you to put a reason in for that. So the EPA booking team reallocate that then to a different IEPA if it has been rejected. Best case scenario is the arrow that goes straight down where you've accepted it. You've accepted the allocation, and then you're going to proceed with the EPA scheduling, moving into that planning meeting. And the planning meeting is going to be the most important part of that part of the process. And we just have a question. Julie. Hi, Julie.
Hi again. Just a question about the availability. If, as an IEPA, we organise the planning meeting and arrange the date of the assessment, how does the EPA booking team, I mean, obviously they need to know our general availability, but if we're making the actual dates, how do they allocate based on their understanding of our availability, if that makes sense?
Yes, it does. I understand totally. So the general availability is to give them an idea as to whether you would be able to accept it. So if in the availability portal you're all red for a couple of weeks because you've got a full caseload and you're really busy, they perhaps wouldn't give you any more at that time. And also, yes, you're right, you will be planning, you will be scheduling them in. But a really important point that I can share with you here is that whilst you will be working and carrying out EPAs for beta with EPA Pro, you will still be live for Learning Assistant current standard BAU allocations as well. So okay. There will be a dual system here. You can still accept work and allocations under the standard process. But obviously we will be asking you to carry out some EPAs on the new beta trial. So availability will remain key to that standard process where you can still get work in the usual way. Okay,
thank you very much.
Rebecca, can I add to a point there?
Yes.
Sorry, hello, this is Rachel Roberts here. I work with Rebecca on the associate management side. One of the points that we think is really key during the beta is that the IEPAs continue to update their availability in the place they currently do that, in the hub, so that the EPA booking team has visibility of the general availability. And then the EPA booking team may need to use information that's in EPA Pro about what your allocations that you've already accepted, and also on Learning Assistant and the hub for the business as usual processes, to get an understanding of whether they can allocate you more work. It may even be that the EPA booking team, if they have a number of allocations that they want to give to you, they may even have a phone conversation with you about your general availability in advance of allocating on EPA Pro. But ultimately, when the EPA booking team allocate on EPA Pro, it's up to the IEPA to decide whether they have the capacity to be able to accept that allocation. And there are two possibilities. You can accept it and proceed, or you can reject it. And then the EPA booking team will need to reallocate that to a different IEPA. So it is going to be more challenging because it is a dual system initially. But for the meantime, if the IEPAs can continue to update their availability so that we've got as much information as possible to ensure that the allocations are as successful as they can be, and we don't get lots and lots of rejections. Is that okay, Rebecca?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Rachel. Does that answer your question, Julie?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just one more point to note on this slide before we take a short break. If there are a number of apprentices that the customer wants to put forward for EPA, then obviously the EPA team will have a conversation with you about that block allocation. And if you accept as an IEPA an EPA allocation, and you've already accepted it, and then you reject it at a later time, we will need to let the LEPA and the EPA team know, because obviously we've got to send that back round into the allocation process. So just a couple of points there. And I think that would be a good time to take a 10-minute break just to stretch our legs and grab a quick coffee, because we're then going to go into planning meetings and what's going to happen at the planning meeting and more detail on that. So if we could take a quick 10-minute break, and if we come back at about 10 to 11, if that's okay with everybody, thank you. Okay, are we all ready to come back? Can I just ask you to raise your hands if you can hear me just before we start with the next part? That would be great. Just checking that you can all hear. Fabulous, we've got lots of hands. That's good. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're ready to restart, and just to say, in addition to this slide, just before we move on to planning meetings, because IEPAs will be working on both LA and EPA Pro, we will be making a note of that on the system. So the EPA booking team will be able to keep a note of that so they can see that you are an IEPA that works across both systems. So that's a really good point. Thanks, Steve, for sharing that. Okay, let's get started on planning meetings then. So if we have a look at what the planning meeting is, so the planning meeting is set up by the IEPA to agree the dates, locations, and very importantly, the attendees that will need to be involved with the assessment methods that are taking place for that EPA. So it might be that there is a number of attendees that needs to be at that assessment method, and that's what the planning meeting is all about. So the planning meeting will be conducted remotely using GoToMeeting so that people can attend from different locations. It might be that the apprentice is in one location that day and they're joining the meeting, or the provider is. So that's why we're using GoToMeeting. It will be attended by the IEPA and the provider, but it could also be attended, as I said, by the apprentice and also by the employer. It will very much depend on the standard and the availability of all of the stakeholders involved with the EPA. If there are a number of EPAs taking place on or around the same time with a number of different apprentices, they may attend the planning meeting. So the meeting will be an opportunity to meet the IEPA in advance of the assessment remotely, very much set the scene of the assessment, what's going to happen, plan in those dates, make those agreements to ensure that the EPA proceeds and is successful, and flag any important information or considerations, as we mentioned with both of the standard examples, getting that access to the information on time. With customer service, the important information would be location, timings. Any considerations might be access to that location. We do work with many locations that have intense security requirements, so that could also be a factor within your planning meeting. After the planning meeting, the changes to the assessment dates, resits, etc., would be made and arranged via a phone call. So if you've set up the EPA and a change needs to happen following the planning meeting, then that would be amended in a phone call between the IEPA and the customer. As with all of the dates, it's very important that when the planning meeting date is set, that the IEPA needs to ensure that they fulfil on that commitment. So this planning meeting is an opportunity for all of the stakeholders, the IEPA, the apprentice, the provider, the customer, employer, whoever is attending that planning meeting, to come together and to make that commitment at that time and to agree when the assessment events are going to happen. It will be a good opportunity for the IEPA to meet with the employer and provider in advance of the assessment, so putting a face to a name. These are GoToWebinar. They will require a webcam, so audio and visual capabilities are required as with any EPA. As I've said, it very much sets the scene for the assessment, how it will be conducted, any issues that need to be resolved, or questions will be discussed within that session. If there are any issues, exceptional circumstances. So we all know that life can happen and spring unexpected surprises on us at any point. So should anything happen and as the IEPA you're not able to attend the meeting, then you would be able to make contact with the provider, with the customer, to suggest alternative dates. But you would need to do that via email if you're going to change a planning meeting, and copy in the EPA team and the LEPA so that everybody is aware of any changes. So how are we going to set up the planning meeting? We are currently developing a range of email templates for IEPAs. This is just a draft example of a planning meeting contact email on the screen. And we're setting up a resource bank of email templates for IEPAs to use. So this is just an example. It was drafted for a different standard, but as you can see, you could amend that information. We're updating these all of the time. So before we go live, we will share with you a resource bank of the email templates that are finalised and that have been signed off. So there's still some work to do on these, but this gives you an example. So after the allocation of the EPA has happened, the planning meeting is set up, and in order to initiate that planning meeting, the IEPA will need to send an email. Our current template is just an example. It looks something like this. So it has, it has the information about the standard, an introduction. So hello, my name is Rebecca Wozniak. I'm your allocated independent endpoint assessor for this EPA. It says here about a short bio. I think we might be changing the approach to that in the next couple of weeks. What we're trying to do is make this email template a really good introduction to say, hi, I'm the IEPA. I'm going to be taking you through this process and what I can do to support you. And obviously, as an independent endpoint assessor, there's only so much interaction and support that you'll be able to provide. So these email templates are a way of introducing yourself, but also safeguarding that independency. So you'll say hello, you'll start that communication with the customer. So as it says there, the first stage of the process is to set up the initial meeting, and that planning meeting is an opportunity to explain the process of EPA. So you'll be able to explain to them, this is what we need to agree. These are the assessment methods, which they should know already. Plan in those dates. Answer any questions relating specifically to the EPA. And those will be questions around planning, making sure that you've got everything prepared for the events. You can provide an overview of the assessment methods within that session. And of course, most importantly, agreeing on locations, times, etc. So what we're asking you to do as an IEPA, and oh, my slides are flicking around, sorry about that. Good question there. Will the emails be sent via the system or via email separately? They will be sent via email separately. So the EPA Pro system does have some automatic email communication, but the assessor, the IEPA, will also need some manual email templates, because this is the introductory email that we need to send, and it's not a system generated one. So this email here will initiate that planning meeting. So the booking comes in, it's allocated to the IEPA accepts, the IEPA will set up a planning meeting by populating the email template and emailing it out to the customer. And here you'll see numbers 1, 2 and 3. That's where the IEPA will add in some dates and times to suggest to the customer, this is when I'm available to meet. Please confirm which date and time you would prefer. So as an IEPA, I'd look in my diary, I'd think, yeah, I can do a planning meeting there, and there, and give them a variety of times and dates. They would then come back to me and tell me what they want to book. Any questions on that? No? Okay. So as I said, there are going to be a bank of templates, and we will be sharing the email templates with you. But this is a first draft, and this is to initiate that. Oh, it wants me to display that next slide, I think. So this is the sample template. As I've said, we want to give them at least 3 options, and an explanation of what the planning meeting is, and tell them as well what do they need to bring to that session. And a really good example of that is we need to know the availability of the apprentice and the employer. We need to make sure that we've got a date that works for both of them and a time. The location is good. What other information do we need? If it's a customer service EPA or a practical observation that you're going to need to observe, I think it's really good that you discuss that at the planning meeting. It's vital that when you go out and observe, that you are observing something. They have planned that the apprentice will be busy at that time, actually doing something so that you can observe it. So that's what the planning meeting is all about, and it should take place within 10 days of you accepting that EPA allocation on the system. Okay, any other questions about the planning meeting and the email? No? Okay, let's go on to the next slide then, which is displaying itself. There we go. Planning meeting process. So let's just work through this now, and you might then have some questions around the planning meeting. So the planning meeting dates have been agreed between the IEPA and the provider, and also the apprentice, whoever needs to attend that meeting. And that has all been arranged via your email template with the customer. Then the IEPA will send a request to the EPA events booking team, as we mentioned earlier, and as Steve mentioned in his point, that we need to send that events booking request through, because the EPA team will need to know that they've got to set up a go-to-meeting event if your standard requires one. So just thinking about, let's use customer service. So you've arranged the observation, you've arranged the date for the PD and everything within the planning meeting. You will need to make sure that you send the booking request form to the EPA team to set up those go-to meetings. Then the EPA events booking team will set up the go-to meeting event, and the notifications and the event links will be sent to the attendees. So that will be to you as the IEPA, to the customer, to anybody else that needs to join that session. The IEPA will then set up the planning meeting in EPA Pro. We're going to have a look at how we do that later today. And all the attendees that are going to attend that planning meeting will receive a notification. The planning meeting takes place, assessment dates and attendees agreed for all of the components, locations, etc., information collected on an IEPA meeting recording form. So as you would expect, the IEPAs are very familiar with our recording forms. We have a form specifically to capture the information that comes out of the planning meeting process. The IEPA would then set up the assessment dates that have been agreed within that planning meeting on EPA Pro. Again, we'll take you through that later today. And you'll add the information that's been gathered within the planning meeting. So all of those dates for the assessment methods, if it's an observation, if it's a PD, we will plan all of that and we will enter the dates into EPA Pro. And if required, the IEPA will send a request to the EPA bookings team to set up the supporting GoToMeeting event. So our observation might be face-to-face, and we've got all of that planned in, but we're going to do our PD remotely. So we'll need a GoToMeeting link setting up. And then we have the EPA events booking team. They will set up that GoToMeeting event. The notification and event links will be sent to the attendees. So some points to remember at the bottom of the screen. A planning meeting needs to be set up on EPA Pro for each apprentice. So when you are setting up a planning meeting and you're sending your email template to the customer to set up the dates, in EPA Pro, you will physically have to set up a planning meeting for each apprentice, even if some of the dates and the times are very, very similar, because each apprentice is set up individually in the system. And as it said there, even if you're coming to the same meeting, those dates might change moving forward, but you will need to set up an individual planning meeting within EPA Pro for every single apprentice. And again, we're going to give you a demonstration of that later. If the customer's gateway does fail, the evidence doesn't pass gateway, then the planning meeting would need to be rescheduled. And the IEPA would need to take some action. So the EPA team will let the IEPA know to pause and when they can then reschedule, because the EPA team will be able to see when that evidence has passed the gateway. Initially, the EPA bookings team will schedule the GoToMeetings, as we've mentioned, throughout beta. But as we move forward, we are going to keep reflecting. We may make a change where the IEPA sets up those GoToMeetings. But as it stands, the EPA booking team will still do that. Initially, the IEPA will collect all of that key planning information. We're going to put it on our recording form. You'll put the information in EPA Pro. And then when it's in EPA Pro, you'll be able to see that, and so will the customer. The last point there for the showcase portfolio, the date entered will be when the assessment is due to take place. And the customer will be reminded by the system to upload associated evidence at a certain amount of time beforehand. So remember at the beginning, we said that EPA Pro provides a very clear process for the customers to see at which stage their apprentice is at, and also for the IEPA. So it's a much more transparent process. And if we go on to the next slide, just to bring all of this together, this recording form will change, but it's just to give you an idea. If you're an IEP, you're used to working with our recording forms, so the colours and the layout will look quite familiar to you. We are developing a form that you can use for the planning meeting. It may look a little bit something like this. We want to capture what's been agreed, the assessment schedule, what's the location and the time and the attendees for that assessment method. Will there be a GoToMeeting link required? Who are the attendees? What evidence will need to be uploaded to carry out those assessment methods? This is very much a draft work in progress slide, and by the time we go live, we will have a final document that you will complete and document the outcome of that planning meeting. Any questions about what we've talked about so far? Just want to pause for a second. No? Okay, so obviously this document is going to be really important for recording all of the information that comes out of the planning meeting. And as I've already mentioned, for our hospitality standards, we already use something very similar, and they already go through a process of making sure that all of the events are planned in, and we've got the required evidence in terms of recipe logs, etc. So this is a process that's familiar to us, that we're already using, and now we need to adapt it so that it fits across all of the standards. For beta, we'll adapt it to use for the 4 standards, and then we will roll it out. If I just move on to the next slide, there is a process flow of the meeting process, so the planning meeting process, and the evolve test. So if you are joining us for business admin, then that standard involves an evolve test. And just want to run through this process for the purposes of those IEPAs. So you'll see on the screen that we have a little process flow, something that we call a Visio diagram, and it will take us through the process of getting to the evolve point. So where we've got the allocation and we've got the planning meeting date has arrived there in the blue circle. The IEPA will attend the planning meeting and agree the assessment plan. And within that planning meeting, if evolve test is an assessment method within the standard, the IEPA will also discuss the evolve test, because it's really important that the evolve test is not sat until the gateway has been completed. They cannot sit the test before gateway has been successfully passed. So the City and Guilds team will monitor the status of any evolve bookings to reduce that risk that the tests have been taken out of sequence. And it is still the customer's responsibility to book the evolve test. And what will happen at the planning meeting is that the IEPA will say, have you sat the evolve test? They will hopefully say no, because they can't sit it before gateway, or they may have just sat it because they've just passed gateway. Need to check and confirm that it's been taken at the right time post gateway. Has it been passed? Have we got a pass result already? Do we need a resit? And we need to confirm all of that information at the planning meeting. So whilst it's the customer's responsibility to book the evolve assessment, the IEPA will put that date into EPA Pro. So that in EPA Pro, we're taking them through that process, and it's a fully mapped process of everything that needs to happen for that EPA. Again, in the demonstration from Libby on the system later, she will show you a timeline from registration all the way through to results, and that you can see how clearly you can track the EPAs. And as an IEPA, you will need to input that date of the evolve test into the system, and we'll show you how easy that is to add in the dates for each of the components. Any questions around evolve? No questions, no hands. Okay. So we have mentioned this already, the key IT systems. So I'm not going to hover on this too long, but just to say that, as I mentioned earlier, the customers are in a process of upskilling as well. This is new for them. We're introducing it to them. We're putting the training and support in place, just as we are with our IEPAs, and also with our LEPAs who are having a separate quality assurance session. So it is all very new, and we will be kind of finding our way as we go through some of the processes. Okay. So if we just look at the overview of the assessment process, I'm just going to go through this. It's quite high level. We'll look at the points to remember, and then I'll check again if anybody wants to ask any questions. So we've got our planning over here. If we start with planning new assessment dates, excuse me, I will just need a drink of water, just a second. Sorry about that. So we've got information. Let's just start with over on this left-hand side with information, the evidence that's been provided. We have that information available to the IEPA, and the assessment takes place. Is it going? And we've done all of the planning. Everything's planned. We've got the conversation in place. The assessment takes place. Whether that's remote or face-to-face. As an IEPA, the actual assessment, the IEPA assessment packs, the IEPA recording forms for your standard are all remaining the same at the moment. So you need to carry out the endpoint assessment, complete the documentation for the assessment, the assessor forms, feedback for a fail, and enter the result. On EPA Pro, you're going to save, if we just go over here to this two-pronged flow on the right, as we mentioned earlier, as the assessor, you're going to save all of that documentation onto SharePoint. We're going to go through that in detail. We're going to tell you what to save where and give you access. And then you will go onto EPA Pro and input the result and the fail feedback per component only. The LEPA will quality assure, and when you've uploaded the information, when you've got everything ready and you're making your assessment decisions on EPA Pro, very similar quality assurance process to what we have currently with Learning Assistant. The LEPA will go in, they'll quality assure the information that you've put there. Yes, they're going to need to go into SharePoint and look at your workings and your justification documentation. And then they're going to check EPA Pro to make sure that the grade is correct, that you've input, and that you've attached your fail feedback if that is a requirement. If they need to change the grade or they need to make any amendments to that outcome, as we do now, the LEPA will contact the IEPA, not within EPA Pro, away from the system, and talk about those changes that are required. And we can make that change. So the standard verification quality assurance process remains the same. It overarches everything that we do, but they will access the information from different locations where you've saved that documentation. If everything is okay, then the LEPA's quality assured it and they don't want to make any changes. Obviously, they'll quality assurance sign off and the pass result would be released to the customer, or the fail result would be released with the feedback available. And a really key point about EPA Pro is that, yes, we're going to release by component. We're going to give them fail feedback by component, but the fail feedback will be attached to the system. So the customer will be able to view that straight away. At the moment, we have a manual process where the fail feedback has to be picked up and physically sent out to the customer. This new system will allow them to access that information straight away. So that's why it's imperative that the LEPA quality assures that failed feedback and everything is double checked before we publish the results. I have a question. Oh no, Steve's lost sound. Let me just check my connection is good. Can I repeat the last 30 seconds? Yes, of course I can. It's fine. Okay, so let's go back then. We're recapping, so this is good to make sure that we're all clear. So the assessment takes place, let's start at the top. The assessment takes place face-to-face or remote. The IEPA will complete the documentation, the assessment documentation, all of the same recording forms that they complete now. And for the standard, and they will save that for beta, for EPA Pro. They will save all of their working documents and assessor recording forms into SharePoint, and all that will sit on Pro is the result for that component and any failed feedback that's going to go to the customer. Nothing will be made available on EPA Pro to the customer until the LEPA has quality assured it. So in the same QA process that we have now, the LEPA will need to go into SharePoint to look at the assessor working documentation to see how they've worked out the overall grade. Is it correct? They'll check it on Pro. If there's any changes, the LEPA will contact the IEPA and those changes will be made. When the LEPA's happy, the pass result would be released on Pro, or if it's a distinction or merit, whatever it might be, that's released as a grade. And then the fail result would also be released, but there would be feedback sitting on Pro for the provider. Oh, I think it's my mouse. I've got a question. That's a really good question, Lorraine. I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. I'm going to finish this slide and then let's talk about that scenario. Thank you. So same quality assurance process, the LEPA checks everything. And what I was saying about the feedback is it's really important that the LEPA will be quality assuring those fail feedbacks before they go out. They do that now, but obviously we have a manual workaround where if there's a fail, the EPA team will pick up that fail feedback and send it to the customer. With Pro, it's actually going to be available on EPA Pro. So once we publish the result, the customer will be able to see that failed feedback straight away. So if there is a planning meeting, if there is a requirement for an additional planning meeting or conversation following the fail, so if a retake's required, then the IEPA can set up an additional conversation to set up new dates for resits. So the points to remember on this slide is that the agreed date during the planning meeting will very much drive the timing of the assessment process. So the provider will be reminded on the system to upload apprentices' evidence. Once we've planned everything in from the planning meeting, it will be very clear and very transparent, not only to the IEPA, but to the customer, where we're at in the process and what they need to do with reminders. As we've mentioned, the results are released one component at a time, but I'm going to come back to customer service in a moment. The final documentation will be uploaded into 2 different places during this initial trial phase. We're using SharePoint as the assessor documentation hub because we don't want to share the internal workings of the IEPA recording forms. The reason for that is because a lot of that information is confidential, and if we released it to customers, it would show them how we work out or how we make those judgments, and could therefore provide an unfair advantage. So we don't share those documents now, and we're not going to share them during the beta phase. So the LEPA will need to make sure that that's all quality assured. If the retake is needed, the IEPA and the provider should organise new dates for those assessments or assessment to be retaken. And as we've mentioned about component releasing. So I think when we go through the system, a lot of this information will drop into place about releasing via component only and where information is going to be stored. I'm going to come back to Lorraine's question. So thank you, Lorraine, for the question. She says, if the apprentice fails the showcase, will there still be the opportunity for them to overcome this via the interview and the PD? Lorraine, I'm going to unmute you. And you might be personally muted, so you might need to unmute yourself. Just want to talk that through. Oh, you're self-muted, Lorraine. Perhaps you can't hear me.
Sorry, yeah, I've got it.
You can hear me, great.
Technology, I'm afraid. Yes, so currently, I didn't want to say this, but I've had quite a lot from one organisation where the organisational knowledge has not been met, so the learners have actually been failed. However, through the interview and the professional discussion, that evidence has actually been generated. So in this case, if it is a fail, will they still be able to do that through the interview and professional discussion, or is it going to be a fail and then they're going to have to go back and generate the evidence for the showcase?
Is this for business admin, Lorraine?
For customer service. It's
for the customer service. Okay. So at the moment, that's how it's working, isn't it? They submit their showcase, you have the interview with them, they have the obs, and then you mop everything up in the PD.
Yep.
Yeah. So there might be a slight change moving forward. We haven't yet finalised how that's going to be, and I know that's how it's working at the moment. So if they were to fail the showcase, at the moment, I think your guidance is that if it's things that can be picked up in the interview PD, that's what you do, isn't it?
So is that just going to continue then?
We're going to continue as is at the moment until we're told otherwise. That's how it's working in practice, isn't it, for you as an IEPA?
Yes.
So we will continue with that approach until we're told differently.
Okay, so the failed feedback would still be uploaded as it is now on Learning Assistant. The employer's going to see that, aren't they?
Yes, so for customer service, it's a slightly different approach, because whereas with other standards, if they failed the observation, you know, you'd give them that feedback. This all comes together with customer service. So we need to confirm how that's going to work. So in EPA Pro, and you'll see in our demonstration later, if they have failed the showcase, then obviously they'll get their feedback for that component, and they'll have to go away and resubmit. They'll have to do a resit. If they fail the observation, then they're going to have specific failed feedback for that observation.
Yeah.
And then specific failed feedback for the PD. So we did pick up on this actually at the other training session last week with customer service, because it's all quite holistic, isn't it, in the way that you pull it all together with the PD.
Yeah.
So what we will do is we will make sure that you've got that guidance via your LEPAs for beta, because we're going to have to document it slightly differently in the portal.
Right. Okay.
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 So thank you very much, Lorraine. It's a really good question. Thank you. Okay, so let's just move on. So we've looked at the overview. Let's look at the assessor process for documentation. So this is quite a big change in terms of where we're going to keep things, where documents are going to be located. So the EPA events booking team, at the moment, just as a caveat here, at the moment, the EPA events booking team will upload the GoToMeeting recordings to SharePoint. So that will be the recordings of the events. The assessor forms and failed feedback are saved initially by the IEPA into SharePoint. So you'll have a little storage area where you're going to keep everything. And then assessor feedback for the failed assessment methods only will be added to EPA Pro. And we're going to have lots of step-by-step guides and mini bite-sized videos to help along the way. Okay, question from Adam. So currently the Gateway team upload those recordings and make those available for IEPAs. So will this be the same? At the moment, we're just being told the EPA events booking team. So I think that's something for one of our meetings later this week, just to confirm who's going to be doing that, Adam. So we do need to, that's something that we do need to take away and just confirm in all of the meetings that I think are coming up towards the back end of this week. Just confirmation, the EPA events booking team will do it initially, and I think we're working through that process. So thank you very much for that. And for the IEPAs that are on the call, really that's an internal decision as to who's going to do that, but it will still be done for you. Okay, that recording will be made available to you, and at the moment we think the location for that will be the SharePoint area that we're going to give you access to. So we've talked about the assessor forms, and we're only going to share that failed feedback on Pro. And then the LEPA will receive an automatic notification that new materials have been uploaded. So that will be their prompt as the LEPA to review that information that's been shared in that SharePoint folder. So they can start their quality assurance of your IEPA recording forms. If everything is correct and the LEPA's happy and they don't need you to make any changes as the IEPA, they can confirm the release of the result. And at that point, the feedback would be available to go out. If there are amends that need to be made, there would be an offline conversation about that. So the LEPA would go into SharePoint, they'll quality assure your IEPA recording forms. If they want to make a change at the moment, they need to have an offline conversation with you about that. So there isn't anywhere within any of these systems that is going to cover that functionality. The LEPA will make contact with the IEPA, drop them an email, have a telephone conversation to talk about what amendments are required. Then the IEPA makes the amendments to the forms, to the results, the feedback, whatever those changes might be, exactly the same as we do it now. We make the amendments as soon as we can as the IEPA. There's no SLA built in around that officially about the amends, but we always say, please do it as soon as possible, because we've got a customer waiting at the other end for that result. So really important we get a quick turnaround. And then the IEPA would save the new version of the form on SharePoint and remove the first version. So if you're going to make some changes, all we want to see in SharePoint is the final corrected version. If there's anything that's incorrect on Pro, then before we've published the result, we can make that amendment. And we make sure that the final information, so if it's fail feedback that's been put up there, it will have been quality assured. But if there's any changes, that would need to come off and we make the final version available. Oh, I've got a hand. Julie. Hi, Julie.
Hi. With the EPA Pro, with the second box, so the fail, any feedback for the fail was added to EPA Pro on the second box, but the customer can't see it at that stage. They can't see it until it gets all the way to the end. Is that right? Because I thought from what you said earlier that the customer could see EPA Pro.
They can see it. And when we look at the system later with a demonstration, each assessment method, so we talk about those as components as well. Each component that you will see in the system represents an assessment method. And if they have failed, we will attach that failed feedback. And once it's been signed off by the LEPA, you as the IEPA will do something called publish. You will release the result. You'll publish it by component, which means that the customer will then be able to see it.
Right, so they can't see it in the second box that you've got there. They can't see it till it's literally being published when it's all been quality assured at the end.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah,
until you press publish, they can't see it.
Right, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Have we got any other questions? No? Other ones that we've done? Good. So let's move on. Let's just have a little bit of a check on time. So we're doing quite well in terms of the content. We may finish a little bit earlier. Okay, so resits. So we've all come across resits. There can be different requirements per standard. So it's very, very important that for your standard, you know what the requirements are, what the expectations are for resits, because some standards are very specific in the assessment plan. You can only have one resit and others are unlimited attempts. So please make sure that you're really clear on that, because within the new world of EPA Pro and this trial with beta, if we do get a resit, then the IEPA is going to be going back to arrange and reschedule new assessment dates. So it's really important that you know all of the components, what the resit requirements are, and that we are compliant with that and standardised. So as we've just mentioned, the results for each component, each assessment method, are released once the LEPA has approved the outcome and where required that fail feedback as well. Where an apprentice fails a component, the IEPA will contact the provider to reschedule, schedule a resit, so to arrange a resit. The resits will be arranged by the IEPA and the customer agreeing a date that is mutually convenient. And then the IEPA will add the date of the resit to EPA Pro. Same process as you followed with the original planning meeting where you set up the dates. So if the apprentice fails one of the first components, it may mean that the assessment dates for the subsequent components need to be rescheduled. And again, the IEPA and provider can work together to reschedule those dates and to agree when they are going to be. When an apprentice fails an evolve test, the provider will be asked to contact the IEPA to confirm resit plans. So obviously, if an evolve test is mandatory, the first assessment method that the apprentice must take and pass, then you will need to be aware of that fail, because it may then impact on all of the other plans that you've made in terms of the other EPA events. A little snapshot there of one of our email templates. So as I mentioned, we're putting together a bank of resources for IEPAs so that you can pick this up. So you'd pick up the evolve fail, you would contact the customer using the template to say they failed, can we set up a call, how do we proceed? So you need to make that contact to say the apprentice has not achieved, we need to reschedule a reset and we need to discuss that. So the whole process goes full circle to then bring them back to a planning meeting in effect to agree what's going to happen next. Okay, so cancelling or withdrawing from an EPA, the customer may decide to withdraw or cancel an apprentice's EPA. There's lots of reasons that happens. It might be that the apprentice is not available. For withdrawals, they may not wish to proceed. They may have left the employment of the employer. They don't want to continue with their apprenticeship. For whatever reason that is, it does happen from time to time. So if this happens, we can all be made aware of that change, because the customer can update it themselves in EPA Pro. So they have some options to select. And as you can see, we've got some bullet points here. So depending on what option they select, that will then impact on the IEPA and the action that the IEPA needs to take. So the status of the apprentice in the IEPA workflow will change, and we're going to have a look at workflows later and what that looks like. So any associated assessment dates that have already been planned in, and we will see them and we'll look at them together on the diary area of EPA Pro, they will automatically be cancelled and they will drop out of your diary on EPA Pro. The status of the apprentice will also change because the associated assessment dates that have already been arranged will remain. Okay, so as we go through, it's difficult to explain without you seeing the system, but we will revisit this later on in the systems session. The EPA team will inform the IEPA about a cancellation or a withdrawal. So they are aware why the status of the apprentice has changed. So you may not get a reason through EPA Pro as the IEPA. You'll just see that things have been deleted from the calendar. So you'll get a reason as to why these changes have happened, why we're not proceeding, so that you can be clear on, will this happen again? Will I need to reschedule a planning meeting? Are they just not available for a certain amount of time? And therefore, can I plan something in the next kind of 6 to 8 weeks? Should I make that planning meeting arrangement with them now? Or have they completely left the apprenticeship and therefore I don't need to take any further action with that apprentice? If the apprentice doesn't turn up for the assessment, then the IEPA should register that assessment as an absence on EPA Pro, so that we've got a log of that. So moving forward, it will be very important that we do keep a log so that we can track if there is an apprentice that regularly doesn't turn up or is absent, or to identify trends. So it might be that that information informs our approach to a particular EPA customer if we've got a regular occurrence of apprentices being absent or not turning up for the assessment. So this system will allow us to track that more closely and to liaise with the customer if we start to identify that there's a regular occurrence and a trend starting to emerge. Any questions around cancellations, rescheduling? No, I mean, in essence, we go all the way back to the beginning and we start that dialogue again with the customer. Okay, no questions, no hands. Right, malpractice process. So you'll be pleased to know that we are coming towards the end of the morning presentation. We should be aiming to finish by about 12. So malpractice process, we currently have a malpractice process in place. If you are already an IEPA, you will be aware that on our LEPA IEPA document library, there is a malpractice form that if you identify a suspected malpractice case, you access the form, you complete it, and you send it in via your LEPA to the investigation and compliance team. Very similar process for beta. So if a potential malpractice is identified, the IEPA would flag that malpractice. It says there at component level. It might happen at component level. It might be an overarching issue that you've identified. But as soon as you do, you need to flag that with your LEPA. You need to access the form and complete that form, and that needs to be with the LEPA for them to review, and that will be raised with the investigation and compliance team. The investigation and compliance team will contact the customer to explain the nature of the investigation that they are embarking on, and that any planned EPA events will be, oh dear, it's a sensitive mouse, I apologise, will be suspended. So the investigation and compliance team will contact the IEPA to confirm if next assessment dates are to be cancelled. So if you identify something and it goes through this process, please wait for guidance from the investigation and compliance team. Your LEPA will be copied in as well, because they will tell you whether or not the next events can go ahead, or in some circumstances they might say they need to be cancelled. It depends on the situation. and the EPA results would also be held pending the outcome of the investigation. If the investigation and compliance team confirm that there's been no malpractice, they've investigated and they're happy that everything has been explained, then they will notify the IEPA, LEPA and EPA team that there's no malpractice, and the IEPA would then kickstart the process again. So they would reschedule the required EPA events with a new planning meeting. Okay. So let's have a look at SLAs and timescales then. So within our current generic IEPA training, we talk about the importance of SLAs. And through any training, any standardization, any monthly updates that we issue, there's a really, really key focus on SLAs because it's the most important part of making sure that we meet with the customer's expectations by delivering their EPA result within the 20 working day SLA. So we are saying that for beta, once the IEPA accepts the allocation, they will have 10 days, 10 working days to plan that meeting, to get that meeting to take place. That planning meeting must take place within 10 working days of accepting the allocation. When you carry out the assessment, as with our standard SLA process, you carry out the EPA, you've got 3 working days to document that EPA and to make sure that all of your documentation is complete and in place. It's a maximum of 3 working days. So as I always say, please make sure that when you've carried out the EPA, you document it as soon as possible. So it's really fresh in your mind. You've got all of that detail and we've got it uploaded and ready for the LEPA to quality assure as soon as possible. Please do not leave it until 5 o'clock on the 3rd working day, because whilst that's still within the 3 working day SLA, the LEPA is waiting to quality assure that result. So make sure when you are thinking about diary management that you're planning in that write-up time as soon as possible after that EPA event has taken place. Then the LEPA will receive the notification to say everything's there, they can start their quality assurance. They will be mapping and tracking this very, very closely to make sure that we are SLA compliant. Yes, the LEPA has 3 working days to quality assure the result. Where that is straightforward and they can do and it can all be signed off, that's great. We can sign off the EPA and off it goes for the results to be checked and released. If it's a complex EPA, sometimes things will take a little bit longer, which is why it's important that you document as soon as possible within the 3 days. The LEPA will then quality assure as soon as possible. And then if there are any issues, it is a complex EPA, then we've got some time, still SLA compliant, to resolve those issues. Any questions around SLA? We're not really changing the SLA requirement that much. We're just adding in the 10 working days between allocation and planning meeting. There's Julie. Hi, Julie.
Hi again. Following the planning meeting, how soon should the first part of the EPA take place?
That's a really good question. So it would depend on the standard as soon as possible. It depends what assessment methods and evidence you're going to need. So, for example, some standards require the IEPA to assess the showcase portfolio, to develop some professional discussion questions, and then there is a requirement that we provide those PD questions 5 days before the EPA event to the customer. And if that's the case, the IEPA's got to work backwards to look at when is the last workable date that I will be able to plan in here. So if you have your planning meeting and you have got everything that you need and it's agreed that it will all be there, then you can make that decision as the IEPA when those EPA events can be planned in.
So it could be within, say, 2 weeks, but if it wasn't within a month, sort of like, I don't know, 5, 6 weeks, would that still be acceptable?
I think it
If
needs
that's
to
when
be.
they could upload the evidence.
I think it needs to be in as soon as possible.
Yeah. Okay.
As soon as we can possibly. Obviously, there's the liaison point there, and that's what currently the EPA team do, because they'll go to the customer and say, well, when do you want this EPA? And
Yeah.
then they come back and we know whether or not that date or that event time is workable, don't we?
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
it's very much a discussion at that planning meeting as to when you feel, if you've got the evidence by this date, is that workable then to plan in the observation for this date and then the professional discussion?
Yeah. So it's as soon as possible, but there isn't a maximum, but it's sort of being sensible about it.
Yeah, absolutely, because you'll be the liaison point with the customer now, and they're going to want to get the EPA done as soon as they can, in agreement with yourself, but you need to be mindful that you do allow yourself sufficient time. So if you had a planning meeting and they say, we want the first event in 2 days' time,
It's not feasible.
Not feasible, no, absolutely not. So you would need to plan and as soon as possible in liaison with them. And I'm sure they're going to come along to the planning meeting with an idea of when they want it to be.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Okay, any other questions? No. So we've started to gather some information. And I've tried to set the scene that this is very much a work in progress, and over the next couple of weeks we're going to be refining this ready for the 27th launch. This is just some main contact points, because we are going to give you some more training, we'll give you more information about what to do and who your contact points are. So allocations, we're still working on that, exactly where they're going to come from and who will be the contact point. We've got the EPA Pro super user. So Libby is our super user. She's going to deliver to you later today how the system works. So there's her email address there. To cope with demand, Libby has had an EPA Pro support email inbox set up, so that if there are any queries about using the system, Libby will support with that. Then further down, we've got the EPA events booking team, GoToMeeting, system process questions, customer issues. So the EPA events booking team will be supporting all of those points that we've just mentioned, but also, supporting the customer on their journey through using EPA Pro as well. So we're all going to come together to support each other in this beta phase. And as you probably already know, that's the email address and the phone number contact for the EPA team. And then at the bottom, we've got your allocated LEPA. So any standard specific technical queries, your allocated LEPA will remain the same. We're not changing it for beta. They will remain the same. They have attended this generic IEPA training, and they will also be attending some LEPA specific quality assurance training within the next couple of weeks. So if you are unsure about who your LEPA is or who to contact in terms of LEPA support, get in contact with your associate manager and they will be able to confirm that for you. Okay, so if I go on to the next slide, this is where we pause, because this is Libby's EPA Pro system walkthrough slide pack, which we will be doing this afternoon from 1:30. So that is the end of our generic input for this morning, that overview of the processes. We've come a long way in the last couple of hours from where we are now with our current offer all the way through these changes with EPA Pro. And next we're going to look at the system. So is there any questions? I'm sure you're going to have lots when you start doing this, so that's fine. But are there any questions now about what we've talked about so far this morning? No? Okay, everybody happy? I haven't confused anybody completely, which is good news, hopefully. No questions, no hands. So, okay, I'm going to end the session there. I'm going to give you some time to go and have a break, have some lunch, and rejoin at 1:30 for the system walkthrough of the EPA Pro system. But thank you very much for your time and for listening to me talk on for the last couple of hours. Very much appreciated. Any feedback, welcome to help us improve what we're doing. Thank you very much. Thank you, and I'll be joining you at 1:30. Thank you very much. Bye.